Welcome, everyone, to Director Services Select Committee meeting of Wednesday, July 10th. I'd like to acknowledge that we are holding this meeting on the territory of the Coast Salish people. And do I have, first? So we have quorum, and we have a few committee guests. We have Director Wilson, Director Smith, and Director Sebring. I would also ask our Legislative Services to explain their voting privileges, and because they're at the table. Please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. According to the CVRD's procedure bylaw, the directors who are present are entitled to vote.
Thank you. That's what I thought. So vote and comment. Thank you. Do I have approval of the agenda?
So moved.
Moved. Second. Call the question. All in favor? The agenda is approved. Adoption of the minutes from April 18th. Moved. Do I have a seconder? Second. Call the question. All in favor? Motion carries. None opposed. Any business arising from the minutes?
Thank you, Madam Chair. There is none.
Next, we have public input period. We have a few guests, and you are welcome to make a comment on anything in the agenda. Is there anyone that would like to come forward? Seeing no one, I'll move on to delegations. We have none. Correspondence. First, we come to unfinished business. And Mrs. Mohan.
Thank you, through the chair. The last time we met at this committee, there was a recommendation made to the board about engaging a consultant to assist the board with determining director compensation. And when that motion went to the board, it was deferred because there was a workshop upcoming that was already planned with the help of a consultant, and this item was selected as one of the workshop items. And then there have been some ideas that have come from that workshop that I think have yet to be discussed in full with all members of the board and especially with all members of this committee. And I believe that is where the matter essentially rests.
Thank you. And I forwarded that information again last night, that we had Karen Brownwig as our consultant. And there were a few action items on there. And is there anything on there that the committee would like to discuss? Director Marsh.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a question. If we're going to discuss what we did at that workshop, wouldn't it be proper to have it as part of the agenda so the public has a view of it? Or because this is just unusual for me that we might be discussing something that happened out of the public and it's not on the agenda so that everyone can see it.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Director Marsh. The item is listed on this agenda, and the purpose that it's listed is to discuss options, so it's appropriate to discuss what is available now.
Okay, thank you.
I don't see a lot of discussion going on, but we could, yes? Thank you.
I
Director
wasn't
Sebring.
at the workshop. I was out of town when that happened. But I'm wondering about the timelines that are identified in the email you sent last night based on that session we had with Karen Brownrigg. The 30 to 60 days, the 2 to 4 months, the 6 months. Do those timelines start now? Are we in the middle of those processes? Because I see there were some action items. Director Stone and our CAO, different people had different things to be looked at. Chair Morrison as well. When are those things due, and where are we in the process of those things that were identified? I think that'll help us determine whether there's something to move forward with today or if it's all kind of still sitting there.
Okay, so we could go through that list.
Yeah. I'd appreciate that.
So the first list was, the first action item was my own, get endorsement at the Director Service Committee meeting. I guess, well, we're discussing it now, and we'll have further action from that. Create a draft position described, and that was an action by all of us. So I do have a suggestion on that if we want it.
Just to be clear, what position are we
We're
describing
talking about
here?
director's compensation.
Oh, for that way, okay. A description for the position of director, thank you.
And at the beginning of this, at the end of our session, we had 3 strong points that we were just gonna do it. We were gonna value what we do, and we were gonna show solidarity. These were strong, action items, or strengths that came out of the discussion in the workshop, but. So, back to the list of items, there was remove the committee end date, and that was done by our Chair Morrison at the last board meeting, and invite the board to participate and vote on this initiative. So that would happen after we come up with something as a committee. Then we had our 2 to 4 months down the line. We would gather data from UBCM and other sources, and Director Stone has been reaching out to different people. I've also saw some different newspaper articles that we could consider, including one about yours, Director Sebring. There's gather data external consultants, so that was something that Mr. Carruthers was gonna look into. And break the mold, so analyze the data and choose our path. So there's a bit of an action the consensus was that it's really tough to follow by somebody's example when there are no examples out there of people actually breaking this mold. So that was as a team, decided that we were gonna move forward and just choose a appropriate compensation. Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a lot of issues with this, and I did hear what different people were talking about. One of them was that they wanted to get different people around the board so that the diversity is better and younger people, and I really feel that it is a challenge. Who does 40 hours a week? Who does 5 hours a week? And I think the compensation it's been going up and up the times that I've been here for the 11 years. There's been benefits that have been given to us that have been very valuable in my family, and one of them was the extended medical, which is very helpful. But I really don't think that we should be looking at this as a paid position. And I don't believe, and I've spoken to this before, that, for instance, a daughter of mine who's a teacher is going to quit for 4 years to become an elected official and give up her pension and everything for 4 years to come back, and it's just for 4 years because you're not guaranteed any others. So I have issues with us going through this again. We've gone through it many times, and I think that our compensation should remain the way it is currently, and I'm just challenged with us again going into consultants, and once again when we were talking about getting back to basics, this is not something that's as important right now to tackle, I don't feel.
Director Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm fully on side with what Director Yanni DiNardo has said, and I'm sure we all recognise that there are large numbers of volunteers out there in groups or as individuals throughout our regions who give of their time and effort with no thought of recompense or of the hours that they have decided to give in service to the community. Equally, we elected officials are also de facto volunteers in the service of the community. The distinction being is that we are volunteers who enjoy the privilege of compensation and benefits, and as such, we should be the leaders in service and volunteerism. I'm not opposed to fair compensation for any job, but I respectfully ask that this committee reflects on the reality and imposition of the recent large increase in property taxes. I've extracted the compensation figures from the Statement of Financial Information from the CVRD for the last 6 years, from 2014 to 2019, and I can put these out there, but what it shows is that there's been an increase in those 6 years of an average of 37%. For instance, in Area C, in 2014, it was 24,391. That figure now is 33,172. It's a 36% increase, 6% per year. And I have other things which I'm going to say later on, but I'll leave it at that for the time being. But basically, this is a non-starter.
Are we back to discussing whether we're moving forward? Director Stone?
Well, I've supported being involved in this discussion, and I understand the points that people have made about being able to make it possible for younger people or with families to be involved in this role. From my perspective personally, as a municipal director, I wouldn't say it's a non-starter. I'm willing to participate in the conversation, but I don't feel like the thrust that we have right now is looking at it from the right perspective. I see in our assigned tasks here some value in gathering that data and getting some perspective, but I'm not sure that the conclusion based on the data that I've seen so far would lead to any kind of an increase when we look at it based on private sector and roles and responsibilities. And I will agree and disagree with Director Wilson at some point. The difference between the volunteerism that we all probably did before we got elected versus this is the level of responsibility and legal accountability and so on. So there is a difference there. I don't think I wouldn't volunteer for something that had this much responsibility if there wasn't some compensation. But that being said, I know, I just like the next guy, sometimes I look at my week and go, I put 65 hours in for a pittance this week, and my day job suffered, my business suffered, and I can make all of those arguments, but again, I'm here as a choice, and then I was elected to be here. I'll go along with this process and provide input and gather information, but I just want to make it clear that I'm not angling for a raise. I don't think the majority of the people involved are angling for a raise, and I get the frustration, but I'm here by choice, and as much as I will support, do the work, provide as much data based on what I'm looking at. If you look at, especially comparing to other electoral areas, I don't think that the data will show that there's any raise warranted. I think the discussion is more around the work that we do, and if the board feels that that's deserving of better compensation. I would say that from my perspective, the area where I think it has the most impact is electoral areas. As a mayor and as the representative on this board, I think that my compensation as a municipal director is fair for this role here. If I have a concern around compensation, it's probably with my job as the mayor of a municipality. And that being said, I've thought about it a lot, and I'm happy to support the process, but I'm not seeing something where I would feel that a raise for municipal directors is warranted, and working with electoral area directors, if there's some adjustment there, I'm happy to go through that process, but I just want to make it clear that I do generally support the perspectives of the previous speakers, that I don't see a necessity for an increase.
Director Sebring and then Director Kuhn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Everything that Director Stone said, we're here by choice. It was interesting. I asked the question about created draft position description, and what did that mean, and what position are we describing? And if it's the position of the director at this table, that's a multifaceted piece. We've all seen at UBCM the discussion around what we call area directors. There was actually a push a couple of years ago to make it, the mayor of Shawnigan Lake, because that was in effect what the position is. I would say that in terms of the work that's done at this table, the area directors have a considerably larger workload than us municipal directors, because we do that same work in our municipal tables when it comes to land use and planning and some of that stuff. We don't really get involved in that here. So to create a draft position description across the board is a problem to begin with, because there are two different sets of expectations and two different sets of workload that come with this. Equally, you know, we're at the meetings, we prepare for the meetings, we go through the agendas, we come prepared to have input and debate and discussion, and that's got to be worth something. I'm with Director Stone in the sense that, no, I wouldn't volunteer for this, because it is a position that carries with it considerable responsibility, considerable liability, considerable thought that needs to be put in. It's work, and it's work I love doing, but would I do it for free? No. Are the compensation levels reasonable? Again, from a municipal perspective, I'm more than happy with the money I get here every 2 weeks. I mean, it's not a lot, but it's fine, because relatively speaking to my other role as mayor, the workload is considerably smaller. So again, with Mayor Stone, I'll support the process. If there needs to be some adjustment to the area directors, the electoral area directors' compensation, that's their stuff. They're responsible and accountable to their electoral area taxpayers for that. But from a municipal perspective, I'm quite happy to leave it alone. So, thank you.
Director Kuhn, Director Stone, and, oh, I'll start a list.
I feel that the comparison of this job with a volunteer position is totally invalid. Volunteers don't get attacked by residents for making the wrong decisions or whatever. We do, and we have to defend our position. We have to justify. So it's a totally different situation. With regard to what is proper compensation for this, I'm at a loss. I feel that I compared with a staff position, even a very low-level staff position, and I kind of feel funny about it, because I keep thinking, okay, yes, we are not, let's say, employed and go to an office every day like a staff position, but that staff position doesn't possibly have the responsibility that we have. So how do you weigh one against the other? I don't know. I think this discussion here is a valid discussion, and I can't see just brushing that aside because we compare it with volunteer positions. That's a totally irrelevant comparison. It just doesn't hold water. Anyway, so I think this discussion is very valuable.
Director Stone, could I go to Director McGonigal? He hasn't spoken yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's important to differentiate between the roles of municipal directors and electoral area directors. That's imperative to begin with. I agree with the previous two municipal directors, and I seldom like doing that, agreeing with the previous 14 speakers, but I think it's important to note the relativity of the workload between the municipal director, and I'll use the director for Shawnigan Lake, for instance. The population of Lake Cowichan is 3,158 people. I believe that Shawnigan Lake is above 7,000 people. We are represented by 5 elected officials who make decisions on those electorate within our municipal boundaries. The director for Shawnigan makes those decisions on her own. So I think one of the most important things is a draft position on the two different levels of directors, municipal directors and electoral area directors, and what their roles are and responsibilities are. Ours as municipal directors are not as intense as those of area directors. We're not dealing with land use issues or public meetings or public hearings, et cetera. So I too feel that I'm fairly compensated for the amount of work and hours that I participate in as a municipal director, but I am most certainly willing to go through with the process. And I would be glad to see what a draft position, a job safety breakdown, et cetera, would entail within those two municipal and electoral area director positions. So thank you very much.
So I have Director Stone, Wilson, Marsh. Anybody else want to go on the list here? Morrison? Okay, thank you.
Hate to agree with Director McGonigal, but. I just want to bring up, I think is a really important part of the discussion too, is the burden that electoral area directors have because of the lack of administrative support. So I think that's a challenge that we don't see municipally. We do, but we do have a pretty big support network there. And we do have a significant more staff assigned to help us. And I know as a mayor, I can go to a half dozen senior staff at any moment on any subject and get a pretty clear decision and support administratively to help make whatever has to happen, happen. So there's a lot more support there. I think that as part of this discussion, compensation is valid to have that discussion for electoral area directors, but also is how we look at supporting that group, whether there's a pool of resources available, because I can see it being that there's a lot of requests that come, there's a lot of diversity and different issues within different parts of the regional district, and without some administrative support, it makes it very difficult, and then you get this situation where, you know, it makes it difficult organizationally too, where you have people getting, you know, 9, 10 requests for different things within the various departments. So I think that's an important part of the conversation when we look at director compensation. Isn't the only thing, and I think it's how we support our electoral area directors administratively to make sure that the burden isn't so heavy. So I think we can find a balance in between.
Director Wilson, did you still have a comment?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. There's no denying that we have long working hours, we have complex decisions and large volumes of documentation and reports to study and digest. But, you know, we knew that when we signed our election nomination papers, and we knew that when we took the oath of office. And I'm going to paraphrase an opinion that was given at the previous meeting of this select committee. And this is taken directly from the video. The main component of compensation is the service commitment elected officials make that distinguishes one from the other. If, or rather the service commitment is discretionary and is part of the problem when looking at compensation as a whole. Expectations of the public are going up over time, but how that actually plays out makes it difficult in how to measure and quantify, because the service commitment, is discretionary. I'm going to say that one again. The service commitment is discretionary. I will continue to support the already agreed 1.99 increase each financial year. But for the reason described, I will not support any increase in the compensation of elected officials in the high ranges which I have heard proposed. Further, I hope that this matter is not considered again until after the next election in 2022. Thank you.
We have Director Marsh, and then Morrison, and then I put myself in.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When I consider, and what I have to cop to is I don't really know the time that area directors spend. But I've heard many of them say it's a pretty considerable amount of time. So it seems to me they must spend at least what municipal directors spend. Now, I think Lake Cowichan and Ladysmith pay their councillors and their mayors different than they do in North Cowichan. But I do feel with the workload at North Cowichan and this workload here, I suspect it's pretty similar. And I think I don't know the amount that we get here. I don't know if you do, Ms. Mohan. Director, what do municipal directors get paid here?
Through the chair, for 2019, Municipal directors are earning $17,901.50.
17,900 and what?
Yes. And electoral area directors are earning $31,295.12.
Okay, equal, I don't know exactly. what-
31,000 and 18,000 are the two numbers.
I don't know exactly what North Cowichan councillors make, but I believe it's something like 28,000 some odd. So if you just, is it 26? Okay, say it's 26. And there's some, it's not just 26, it's a bit more. So say, if you just added, say, 18 and 26. I have to add now. So you're talking about $44,000. That I suspect that from what I hear, Director Acton, Director Yanni Darnito, and some of the other directors spend at least as much time as, I did it again, sorry, Loy, Yanni DiNardo, spend at least as much time as the average councillor in North Cowichan. So I can see why there feels like a disparity. So like Director Stone, I agree with going and doing some investigating. But as I said earlier, when this committee met, I actually think this is something that UBCM should take on with the province, because it's a very awkward position to be put into, to talk about raising your compensation. And just to weigh in on if the board decides not to do it now and leave it to the next board, I don't think that is the appropriate thing either. I think if it's going to be done, it should be done in this term. Maybe in the last year of this term is a possibility, because then people know what they're getting in for. But I don't have a problem with taking this to the step, through the steps, because we've already gone this far. I think it's weird that we would spend all this time and then suddenly go, oh, no, we don't want to do this. We should have said that quite some time ago, in my opinion. So I think it's important to get the information, and then the board can make the decision, and based on accurate information. I certainly have noticed a huge change in, not so much the time, but that too, but the feeling of heavy responsibility for things in this role, like the opioid crisis and the homelessness crisis, the policing shortage, and the stress that our staff and first responders are having, dealing with that and dealing with fires and floods and things. And, you know, I think it's stressful for all of us trying to make decisions on that. So to me, the logical thing when we've come this far and spent a considerable amount of staff time, which equals money, is to carry it through. I know there were large numbers set out that I was really uncomfortable with. I doubt very much we would get to that number through this process. And I think sometimes we have to listen through to people's humor or people's, you know, to realize that isn't necessarily what they're aiming for. Because it seems to me the capture of what happened in that workshop is a very sound process to see, test the waters and see, are the area directors compensated enough for the time that is required? And maybe they are. And maybe they're not. But if we embarked on this, why would we stop before we've done the work? I just don't quite understand that.
Thank you. Director Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank Director Marsh for her comments and for her insertion of the idea that humor is important and we have to use it and look through it sometimes too. And this is very interesting, this discussion, and you know, I looked at some of my colleagues that have been here for a little bit of time, and absolutely we've discussed this issue, and I think one of the smoothest transitions on a bump to director compensation was when at the end of the, not last term but the term before, the board took the bull by the horns, made the decision for the next group coming in The last board chose to pass it to this board to tackle. And that was a clear decision made towards the end of the last term, partly why there was the formation of this committee, is to address this. I'm absolutely not in favor of kicking this can down the road. There's a great deal of effort. I want to applaud the people that came to this workshop and put good effort and energy into this process. I think that there's merit in this process because we're not turning to some external third-party consultant for the heavy lifting on this. We've actually identified us as a group, and with some help from CAO and from Ms. Mohan, for us to carry this on our backs and to do the work that's required. So I think that it makes sense to conduct the exercise, try and stick to the timelines, do the work, have it packaged in a way for all of the board to consider. I'm actually really pleased that we've got members of the board that aren't members of this select committee sitting around this table today. That was one of our goals, is to have a greater diversity of opinion and inputs to this discussion. So I'm more than comfortable to, participate and further this exercise. And I've heard a couple of people go to the outcome already. And I think that going to the outcome before we've conducted the exercise is a mistake. So I'm more than willing to do my part and would encourage everyone else who's interested in this topic to do their part and participate and contribute to the process. And perhaps we'll have something towards the end of the year that we can put before the board that makes a change, or not. But I think that it's worth it to conduct the exercise and see what we come up with. It was a priority for people at the last term that the work didn't get done, and I think we'd be doing us all a favor and the community a favor. And I'll end with this. It's interesting when this topic comes up amongst the public, there isn't anyone that I've heard when they find out what it is a director is paid, an electoral area or municipal director, do they think that we're in any way overcompensated and that we're making money at doing this job? Thank you.
Thank you, Director Morrison. I think that we could have a next course of action, but first I'd like to say that this process started because the last board didn't want to discuss it because it was right before election time. It becomes a sensitive topic. But for myself, I would really like for this to go forward. It's not about what I'm getting compensated, it's about attracting a quality director next time around. It's about being able to compensate them properly. I would argue that every single electoral area director that sits at this table is here because you are privileged in some way. So we are drawing from a pool of people who are privileged. I can only be here because my husband has a well-paying job. And I want to be able to, that the pool of people who want to do this position can be larger, and they should be able to be here as well. So a single mom may not be able to do it, but maybe she wants to. And she could well be more qualified. The skill set that's involved to do this position is huge. And I think we should go through the process that Karen Brownwood suggested, and we can go through what are the expectations from the community as an electoral area director. And they are huge, and the stress is huge. And Director Kuhn brought up the fact about why aren't we comparing this to an entry-level clerk at the CBRD? How do we value our directors? How do we value the people who make decisions at the top of this organization? It's a position that is rewarding, but it also has a lot of facets to it. And I think I would like to be able to compensate the next person who is willing to take on this role that's definitely not a volunteer position. We could keep going around and around. Do we want to do that? Or I could make a suggestion that you've got a motion? Okay, so can we hear the motion and then we could see if people still want to have discussion? Thank you. Director Morrison?
Well, I just scribbled out that we move the select committee pursue the action plan outlined in the workshop notes from the May 23rd workshop.
It's been second. Could I highlight that we would be starting with creating the draft position? And so I'll start a new list. I have Director Stone, Director Wilson, and Director Sebring.
So to speak to the motion, I will support the motion. As I said before, I think that, and this is, I think, you know, the summary of Director Morrison's comments were the process doesn't predetermine an outcome, and the outcome may be that the board decides that status quo is fine. The board may decide that as through some analysis that there's adjustments that need to be made either with compensation or supports for directors administratively within the organization. But I think the best place to start is to put that sort of framework of what it looks like to do the job down on paper. I think it's an important piece anyway. I think we all have pieces that can, you know, from, I remember the Shawnigan Focus, I think it was article from a little while ago. One of the most humorous, best examples probably, and there was tons of things missing from that description. And we do need to account for that we all have different, you know, Shawnigan is a bit of an anomaly in electoral areas around the province. You don't see a community that's as larger than probably a third of the municipalities in the province has an electoral area. So I think we need to keep that in account, that we're not just, and no offense, Mary, but we're not talking about a more rural community without a village core or something like North Oyster, but we're actually talking about a town that is being run as an electoral area with very little administrative support. So I will happily continue the process, add whatever analysis I think is relevant, collect the data that I committed to collect as part of that process, and see where we end up. And we may end up surprised that we find some agreement around where we need to be and how we address it moving forward. So I will support the motion.
To the motion, I have Director Wilson.
Yeah, I can't support the motion at the moment, but I'd just like to comment on something that Chairman Morrison said, or Director Morrison said, something about the outcome being already made up. My outcome, yeah, and I've reached an outcome, is based on the historical data that I've extracted from the Statement of Financial Information, and from that data alone, and I'll say it again, you've all had rises of over 37% over the last 6 years. That's a lot of money. It's a lot more than anybody else has got anywhere. And okay, perhaps it's a lot less than somebody else would get an entry-level car, but nobody yet has mentioned the big benefits that we get here. We have 100% medical, dental, and optical. That's worth a huge amount of money, $5,000 at least a year of money that we don't have to spend anymore. And I'm a bit confused here as to a comment made just now by Director Marsh as to how the opioid crisis is a reason for us to consider our compensation. That's straight over the top of my head there. Thank you very much.
To the motion, I have Director Sebring, Smith, Yanni DiNardo.
I'll be supporting this, and as I said before, I don't think there's anything wrong with looking at it. It's already been mentioned that, you know, the last board kicked the can down the road and left it for us to deal with. I've heard a suggestion that we don't deal with this again until after 2022, and with all due respect, Director Wilson, I don't think that's correct. I would certainly support a notion that whatever the outcome of this discussion is, take effect after the 2022 election, but you know, we can't keep pushing this out, and I don't want to predetermine the outcome. I've already made my position clear with respect to the municipal remuneration. I'm quite happy with what we're getting here, and as municipal directors, and I'm certainly not looking for an increase here. And I guess I would say to Director Stone, as we do the research moving forward, because you make the point about Shawnigan and the population base, I wonder whether there are any models that take the population of electoral areas into consideration. And if not, maybe we should build one, because even at this table, we have considerable diversity there. When I look at Shawnigan versus, and again, no offense to Director Marcotte, but, you know, that electoral area, it's a whole different It's a whole different paradigm, and it's the same responsibilities, but I think the workload is a bit different. So just another consideration as we go forward.
Thank you. Director Stone's going to jump in here, and then I'll let Director Staples and Director Marcotte speak. They haven't spoken yet.
So just want to let you know that I built a spreadsheet model to analyze the different regional districts and population per resident is one of them, as well as assets under administration, budget sizes, all that stuff. So it's nice to be able to look at it. You find some commonality, but yeah, that's in there.
Director Staples, Marcotte.
So Duncan went through a similar process a number of years ago now, and it had been pushed off by the last elected body, and it was one of the first things that we dealt with, and we dealt with it just before an election. And no one likes to have to look at this in terms of our own wages and what we're getting paid, but I can tell you there was very minimal pushback from people once they realized what people were actually making and what people were doing. And I think that what people are doing is really important, because I don't think people really understand how much people actually do in these roles and the time commitment that it takes. And I think that that's a really important thing for us to help people understand. And also, there's two other pieces that I think are really important in this discussion, and one of them speaks to the fact that so much more is being downloaded on local government, and that's new. That has not been, when I started this 8 years ago, it was very different than it is now. And so there's the increase in pressures, societal pressures that Director Marsh mentioned, as well as climate pressures, all sorts of different things. They're changing rapidly, and so that's also putting more responsibility on all the people around this and other tables. So I think that that's a very valid consideration when we're discussing this. And the other thing that this brings up for me, and having nothing to do directly, I guess, with this conversation, but I think something that comes up in my mind as we have it, is that I don't know what the population of Shawnigan was when the CVRD was established, and it was one of the rural districts, but at what point in time does a community grow larger than the capacity of its role in a regional district? And what happens then? Because I don't know the answer to that. When you reach 9,000, if your projections are going up to 15, 20,000, at what point in time are you not a regional district anymore? Electoral area anymore of a regional district? And what does that look like as well? So I think that that's something that, again, connected to this, but important to understand.
Thank you. Director Marcotte.
Thank you very much. When I was first taking on this job, I was absolutely thrilled to take the job, and I did not have any kind of recompensation at all when I started there. It did come in a shorter time, but I never felt underpaid because I had a very good rapport with my community, and that is what my goal was to work with the community more than, it was more important to me than money. So I would think that most of the people around this room really are looking after the people, everyone who lives in that area. We're all trying to make it better and take over some of the things that we can make better. So I do believe that we need to set the bar where we can have people who have to work and who we could put up maybe a little bit of a daycare place for people who do have to work and have their children taken care of. I think there are options that we can look at and will not cost a lot of money to do so. So I will support this. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Director Smith, Yanni DiNardo, Marsh, Kuhn, and then we'll call the question. Director Smith?
Through the chair, thank you. I really appreciate the comments that have been made by the municipalities and those that are here at the table that recognize all the work that goes into an electoral area. As a new director, I must admit that the learning curve was steep, which required a lot more time catching up on projects that were on the go, and that type of thing was definitely a lot of work. I do find myself up at usually 7 in the morning, and I usually finish at 11 at night, and it's 7 days a week. So I think that we are definitely putting a lot of work and effort into our communities as electoral areas. And like someone has pointed out, we're the one and only. Having 9 islands that come under my jurisdiction also means that I have other complications, and so my size may not equal Shawnigan Lake, but the complexities based on where everything is geographically also brings into question how much work is added based on that type of thing. As to compensation, is this motion going to include a breakdown for electoral area directors and then the addition for the board being at the board level? So is there a 2-tier look at this through this motion? If it has a 2-tier look, then I think that's an important part too. Looking at what electoral area directors receive compared to the municipal directors when they're receiving 26,000. So are we looking at that in this motion?
Yep, I think that would be part of our workshop. Thank you. I have Director Yanni DiNardo, Marsh Kuhn to close.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Listening to around the room, yes, I guess I've changed my tune to play this one out. But still, there we go. With our strategic plan, we said back to basics. Now we're hiring our consultant. We're going round and round again. And I do agree with some of the comments that for electoral area directors, we are a mayor without a council. That is definitely true. And there is a burden and there is very little support. We have to do the newsletters. We have to do all of that. Even actually my calendar, trying to figure out who and where do I go, like it's you're on your own. I totally agree with that. I don't agree that the downloading, because I think that we around this table have taken a lot of the downloading ourselves. Sure, the province, we can say that, but we have continued to take on grants and do more things and get involved in things that not necessarily is our bailiwick. So yes, we need to be valued. This process is awkward. I feel that the compensation has been going up all along. I've been through a few of these processes already. So once again, I guess we go through the consultant, we wait in here, and then, I'll show my solidarity. Thank you.
To the motion, Director Marsh Kuhn.
I'm just wondering if it's time to call the question, because we're supposed to be somewhere, some of us at 2. And
People still want to make a comment, otherwise I'm willing to call the question. Director Kuhn is waving his finger. Director Kuhn, to close.
To make a comment, this idea of, and I appreciate what Director Wilson did, to go back and dig up all the old figures. What my impression is here is we're trying to reevaluate what an area director is or what the compensation should be. So if we do that, then pretty much whatever happened in the past is irrelevant, because we're dealing with a whole new set of ideas. And I'm kind of in favor of discarding all the old stuff. If we look at something new, well, get rid of the old stuff and look at it new. And that's my idea anyway.
I'll call the question. We'll read the motion again, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The recommendation before you is that the Directors Select Committee pursue the action plan outlined in the notes from the workshop hosted by Karen Brownrake at the Oceanfront Suites in Cowichan Bay on May 23rd.
I'll call the question. All in favor? Oh, do I have somebody who? Oh, it's been second, sorry. Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? I have Director Wilson opposed. On to unfinished business number 2, Mrs. Mohan.
Thank you, through the chair. The code of conduct that this group worked on and finalized with a number of edits is before you in the agenda package, reflecting some of the changes that were talked about at the last meeting. In addition, I had been asked to determine whether or not in the last section of the document where it talks about consequences for violating the code of conduct, whether or not the consequences that were listed were all legally available to the board. And in getting an answer on that question, found that one of them was not, which is that the board is not at liberty to reduce the compensation of an elected official. Where there are structures in place where elected officials are part of committees and there's a stipend associated with the committee, and one of the consequences is removing someone from a committee, then the natural result might be a reduction in compensation, but you as a board do not have the authority to reduce an elected official's compensation. So the draft that's in front of you in this agenda package has that bullet point removed, but in all other respects, it's as was discussed as the last meeting.
Director Stone, you had a comment? You're going to pass? Okay, I have Director Kuhn had a comment, and Director Sebring.
I have a bit of a concern about this whole code of conduct business. And my concern is this. We are a group of people here that are supposed to make decisions. And some of the decisions are quite uncomfortable at times. And when you face uncomfortable decisions, yes, you get into, let's say, a little bit of hot discussion. And yes, maybe things will be said that under normal circumstances wouldn't be said. But that's all part of the business as far as I'm concerned. With the code of conduct, the way I read it, some of it goes against my grain, and for the following reason. We're putting ourselves into a smaller and smaller boxes with that. And we're doing, it seems we're doing it willingly. And we're doing it because of considerations of general public expectation or whatever. But what it does in the end is, my fear is we'll be all just be a bunch of robots sitting there. Oh yeah, yes, it's my turn. Da 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 da. Thank you very much. On. You will not get a proper discussion going. Discussions always, if you use your head and you want to discuss something, it's almost inevitable that you will kind of confront somebody else with that. If you want to just be nice and tippy-toe around and try to accommodate everybody's feelings, you'll never get anything done. It's very simple. So that's my stand, and I'm opposed to any kind of. The question that arises also is, how many instances have we had here where behavior was really, let's say, not up to snuff? Were there that many? So is it really necessary to go through this exercise? So anyway, I'm against this because I feel we're constricting ourselves. In discussions, we'll be dancing around in circles, trying not to offend each other. And thank you. I'm not into that.
I appreciate that comment so much. Thank you, Director Kuhn. Director Sebring.
Thank you. In response to what we just heard, I couldn't disagree more strongly. We haven't had, to my knowledge, any egregious behavior at this table, but I have seen it at other tables, and this is a precautionary note so that we have a tool to deal with it. And with all due respect to Director Kuhn, you know, this policy talks about disagreeing with ideas but not with people. Director Kuhn, I like you as a person, but that was a stupid idea. We can say that without offending you, right? If I call you an idiot, that's a different thing. And that's what this policy tries to distinguish out. And given what I saw at our municipal table in the last term, I'm really, really supportive of this as a concept. I don't think it puts us in a box at all. I am happy to debate ideas. I am happy to disagree with anybody around this table without being disagreeable, and we can do that. Equally, I do have one question, and it's kind of a bugaboo of mine. When I look at the standards of conduct on media platforms, and I'm late to this discussion, I haven't seen this until this meeting. Bullet 1 under standards of conduct on media platforms, adhering to confidentiality requirements, obviously, and using caution in reporting board decision-making before the CBRD has released its formal communication. That one sticks in my craw a little bit. And not so much for me in my role here, but as a general principle of governance. I really strongly believe in communication between elected officials and the citizenry. And in the last term at North Cowichan, before I was mayor, and I don't do it now because I don't have time, but if I did have time, I would. At the end of the meeting, I'd go home and I'd do a quick bullet point, here's what we did at council. And if I were to do that, or if some director around this table wanted to do that for their electors, it would be the way I see it, it would be in violation of that bullet of the policy. And I don't know that we should be expected to wait on staff to provide the description of the meeting. If somebody asks me, what did you do at the meeting, I'm going to tell them. And I don't think there's that we should have to wait until the CBRD has released its formal communication. I don't operate that way. I'm just saying.
Thank you. I think Mrs. Mohan would like to comment on that, answer your question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, I believe that the key part of this point is actually the confidentiality piece.
Oh, the confidentiality piece, absolutely.
Right, so I think what it refers to is situations where decisions and discussions happen in closed session that are anticipated to be released to the public in very short order. The nature of the discussion, the decision has happened closed, but after the fact it's realized that then you rise and report. And sometimes there's a delay in rising and reporting. And there have been instances, I think, in the past where board members have talked about something that they knew was going to be, released in advance of an actual release.
Okay.
And that's really, I believe, what this was addressing.
If that's what this is about, and if that's understood, I have no problem with that at all. But if it's a case of, and again, I can only speak from my North Cowichan perspective, we do a council matters the day after the council meeting. So we meet on Wednesdays, Thursdays. A council matters piece goes out over my signature, which I don't tell anybody, but staff actually writes and I vet and clean up, and then we send it out. But if one of my councilors, the way I sort of interpret this, if one of my councilors were to preclude that council matters by putting something out the night of the meeting, the way I read this, that would potentially be in violation of this kind of policy. And I just want to make sure we're not doing that.
Mrs. Mohan.
Thank you. Through the chair, I just thought of one other case, which is that, the open sessions are televised, so essentially all of that is public
Exactly.
anyways. And
That's
anything that's really televised is in the public domain and you can speak about it. But, from my perspective, there have been times in open board meetings where the discussion becomes quite convoluted. Motions go back and forth a lot. And at the end of the day, even the directors can sometimes be
Yeah,
confused about
I've
what was
seen-
decided, right?
yeah.
And that's why we have minutes. And so, in
fair
those kinds of cases, it's also dangerous to be reporting on decisions when there might be confusion about an issue, and then it's always better to wait for the minutes or wait for an official statement. So that would be the other occasion.
As long as we're not subject to sanctions for making a mistake.
Yeah, no, I
So
don't.
I'm good. Thank you. Oh, and Madam Chair, I'll move the recommendation if.
First
if you're
and
looking for a
second.
motion.
I still have a speakers list, but now we have a motion on the floor. I have Director Marsh, Stone, Staples, Morrison. Do you still wish to? Okay. And I got a nod from Director Marsh.
Yep, I'd just like to compliment Ms. Mohan on a very thorough and concise job. The committee started with a number of different formats, and some were quite long and some were a bit too concise. And I think she really captured what we felt was the most important thing in a very understandable and well laid out way. So thank you very much. And I support the code of conduct.
Director Staples?
Yeah, I fully support the code of conduct. It's one of those things that when you need it, it's there, and you hope that you don't need it.
Thank you. And Director Morrison, did you still have a comment? Nope, okay, I will call the question. All in favor that this goes to the board? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion is carried. Moving to question period. We still have a few people in the gallery. Does anybody have a question for the chair? I don't see anyone rushing the podium. We will move to a motion to adjourn. Second, all in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.